Welcome back, folks. Today I'm doing two posts because it's my 100th broadcast, so it's 100 and 100A. And welcome to part 2 of State of India's Democracy. The first, as I said earlier, the institutions that I found were in a little bit of a slippery slope. The armed forces were heading towards getting, in my opinion, getting politicized. The Supreme Court, as I said earlier, it's even Stevens, probably more Stevens than even. The High Court seems to be passing some good judgments, including what it's passed, the recent one, Allahabad Court on love jihad. However, the other institutions also, CVC doesn't have the Chief Vigilance Commissioner, I think doesn't still have a chief. That's not really doing so well. Election Commission, I think, needs to be a lot more transparent and has to be open to recounts and complaints, just like what I've learned in the United States, right? And all these particular parts, and also the democracy really needs to have a conversation. The parliament needs to see a lot more action. And here, some of the laws that we have in place, the laws that we have in place actually from the time of the British Raj are actually just shackling a democracy. Let's see what Suhas Palshikar has to write. Democracy, distant spring. Farmers' protest may bring a small beginning of normal politics, of negotiations and compromise. What does he say? First, the prism of righteous monopoly over wisdom. Nobody else knows anything better. Second, the prism of ill will, having arrogated to yourself monopoly over wisdom. It is a small step to saturate yourself with malice. And that's exactly what's happened with this government. The proneness to ill will was on display the moment it brought the K word into discussion of farm protests, the conversion of Kisan into Khalistan. And this also happened, what's happened when you had the Tukde gang or the Gupkar gang. It's all over the place, right? Can only be understood if one takes into account an obsession with majoritarian nationalism, right? Then he says, third dimension of the prism is that brutality coupled with fear of the people. This was on full display when the government decided to keep Delhi out of bounds for the protesters and did not hesitate to use water cannons. As farmers hardened their stance, one could expect naked repression. But what's making it easy is what Manoj Joshi writes. Our colonial heritage. And this is what's important. He says, our imperial masters, the British, left us many fine monuments and traditions, but perhaps the most enduring edifice of their rules is our justice system. Post-independence, the law was supposed to be our defense against arbitrary use of power, but it remained an instrument of repression, not just by its application, but also non-application. Many of India's current draconian laws have their ancestry in the British era, where they were very frankly instruments of repression. Preventive detention law are older. The Bengal State Prisoners Regulation of 1818 evolved to the Defence of India Act of 1915 and then 1939. Remember too, the Rowlatt Act of 1919 that led to the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. Even before the era of terrorism, we had the Preventive Detention Act of 1950, which in its earlier avatar has been used to detain, charge and punish freedom fighters. Instead of scraping them, independent India adopted them. And that's where I think that now we had the white Sahabs, now we have the brown Sahabs. And then it says, Indian broken criminal justice system has become means of punishing dissent and other inconvenient people or people using existing laws. What do we say here? And what Pratap Bhanu Mehta writes, state has no language to understand dissent over them, other than branding it criminal. Pratap Bhanu Mehta, and that's really interesting, and that's what they tend to do, right? And this is the other law that really is crazy, which Karan Thapar writes, contempt of court, a relook may be needed. This brings me to a more important and wider question about about the law of contempt. Has it outlived its utility? And how should we handle cases that should amount to contempt today? So let's go back to its origin to understand its purpose. The concept of contempt is centuries-old British law, which was abolished, folks, by Britain in 2013. What does Lord Denning write? Lord Denning, Britain's former master of the rolls, had this to say of the law of contempt. Let me say at once, that we will never use this jurisdiction as a means to uphold our own dignity, nor will we use it to suppress those who speak against us. We do not fear criticism, nor do we resent it, for there is something far more important at stake. It's a no less than freedom of speech itself. It's the right of every man in parliament or out of it, in the press or over the broadcast, to make fair comment, even outspoken comment on matters of public interest. We must rely on our own conduct to be its own vindication. I think any answers the question I began with, while justice is important, judges must not take themselves too seriously. So this is the other law that's being used to curb dissent, right? And finally, you have this finally a good judgment though, right? Free speech versus hate speech. The Supreme Court's defense of freedom and disavowal of hatred is welcome. In a significant order on Mondays, a two-judge bench of Supreme Court comprising Khanwilkar and Justice Sanjeev Chandra laid out the theoretical basis for distinguishing free speech and hate speech and mounting a strong defense of the former while outlining the dangerous implications of the latter. The bench was considering a petition by journalist Amish Devgan to quash multiple FIRs against him for his remarks against the Sufi saint Khwaja Moinuddin Chishti. The Supreme Court refused to order the quashing of the FIRs, but the real import of the order lies in its pronouncement on the nature of free speech and its limits. It points out that instead of being an elite indulgence, free speech has empowered the marginalized. Remember that, folks. By firmly standing in favor of the constitutional principle of liberty and the fundamental right of free speech, the Supreme Court, at a time when these values are often subject to arbitrary action, has done well and must observe it consistently in its own treatment of matters. Here, folks, consistency is critical. Apparently, because you have the roster which is decided on where the case goes on by the Supreme Court, it tends to seem that when they want a judgment in favor of the government, it goes to a certain set of judges who are far pro-government, and if they want something to do with a far more liberal, they go to some other judge. Consistency is critical, folks. More after the break. Folks, the other thing that's really putting pressure on our democracy, besides the institutions which are not holding up the way they should be and are being buffeting by political winds going from left to right, is what Pavan K. Verma writes, I think, is something like this: distorting a great religion. FIR against Netflix film betrays not just intolerance but also ignorance of Hinduism. What is he writing? I have delved deep into Hinduism. This is Pavan K. Verma. And I am therefore dismayed at the way BJP and RSS, which claim to be pro-Hindu, are allowing their agenda to be consistently hijacked by this kind of ignorant bigotry, which is an affront to all right-thinking Hindus. He says the problem with the ultra-Hindu right is that its aggression is in inverse proportion to its knowledge. These self-anointed guardians of Hinduism are trying to make it run on Taliban diktats. This is true. And what is that? And the two essential laws that really have weaponized and basically distorted this great religion, besides this, is the love jihad that's come in now, and earlier was weaponizing the cow, right? So this is, here you go, right? Shivraj continues on that crazy trend. Shivraj Chauhan says, links love jihad law with Beti Bachao. That's insanity. Okay. And what if and UP police takes it a step further, despite Allahabad High Court judgment passing a judgment against us. UP police may seize accused assets under anti-conversion law. And I pointed out to you earlier that anybody can get up and say that this conversion is illegal, or it's had something to do with lucre or some money, and that's just patently unfair. And this is what Swaminathan has to write. Apex court needs to strike down love jihad laws. The High Court has, now they need to. He says, new laws are planned or already enacted by 8 BJP ruled states on love jihad, an absurd and vicious ploy portraying love marriage of Muslims with partners of other religions as a holy war. You might think secular parties would automatically oppose this, but the Congress and other opposition parties unanimously backed a draconian love jihad law in Himachal Pradesh last year. That's crazy, right? He says the Supreme Court must come to the rescue. First, it must emphasize that consenting adults can marry anybody regardless of family, caste or religious objections. Second, the onus of proof must be placed on the prosecution. Third, such offences must not be cognizable. Fourth, the broad definition of inducement is a veritable scandal. So the court should specifically prohibit the definition from covering gifts, divine promises or college entry. Fifth, the court should scrap clauses permitting interfaith marriages to be cancelled because they supposedly threaten public order or promote enmity between communities. And finally, the Supreme Court should consider throwing out all the new laws on the ground that forced conversion is already illegal, so the draconian love jihad laws are both superfluous and aimed at threatening several constitutionally protected individual rights to religious freedom, to privacy and to conscience. The new love jihad law say the district magistrate must be given advance notice of intent to marry and must clear proposed religious conversions in advance. How can a secular state empower a government official to decide which religion an individual can subscribe to? Important, right? And you see what happens when this happens. Indian police halt weddings as love jihad fears spread. Aligarh man beaten up on way to register interfaith marriages. Here it gets worse. Is basically the other law that really is nefarious is Karnataka Assembly passes bill against cow slaughter. But luckily what came to the rescue was apparently this bill has not been approved yet. And just when that's happening, you get this article by Isha Roy. It says Indus Valley diet had dominance of meat. Find study. The diet of people of Indus Valley civilization had a dominance of meat, including extensive eating of beef, finds a new study published today in the Journal of Archaeological Science. Out of domestic animals, cattle, buffalo are the most abundant, averaging between 50 and 60% of the animal bones, found with sheep, goats accounting for 10% animal remains. The high proportion of cattle bones may suggest a cultural preference for beef consumption across Indus population, supplemented by consumption of mutton and lamb. So this is what's important, right? One side we are banning this. The other side, historically, we are being told we used to eat that earlier. Attempt to convolute history and to weaponize against the minority community. And also against the Dalits, who actually, this is probably the best form and cheapest form of protein for them. So folks, this is what I say, going down a slippery slope. More after the break.
Think of natural products. Think of Sada Jeevan.
Folks, another event that happened in the recent past, which also again suggests that our religion is being misused for the wrong reason, for divisive politics, is written by Anand Patwardhan. He says, on November 2nd, the UP police arrested Faisal Khan. I have known Faisal as a human rights activist working alongside, right, with him. And what does he say? Why was he arrested? On October 29, they reached Nand Baba Mandir and were warmly received and given prasad by the priest. Faisal, in his distinctively Muslim cap, recited from the Ramcharitmanas, and both men spoke about the shared values in religion. Some of this is recorded on a phone camera. When namaz time came, Faisal asked if there was a mosque nearby, but the priest said they could offer namaz within the temple compound. One of the Hindu Khudais photographed this moment, signifying the harmony they believe in and the enthusiasm, posted it on Facebook. And the photos went viral. All hell broke loose. The priest at the temple was pressured to lodge a police complaint, and Faisal was arrested and brought to Mathura jail. Sad. And this is what I say. And Swato Ganguly writes, back to the future, guys, and back to the future. He says, it's odd, therefore, that narratives of past glory and present degeneracy, let's call it an ideology of declinism, have gripped present-day Indian politics. We should be much better off playing the hand the history has dealt us and leverage the unique access to global markets or technology that English can afford to us, or use the Taj Mahal to grow tourism and create livelihoods. While Indians remain mired in culture wars whose root is an overly romantic view of the past, societies as different as America or China are more pragmatic in leveraging, and they have, rather than crying over spilled milk, their future orientation rather than obsessing with the past enables them to move ahead and explains why they are superpowers today. Indeed, if there's real lesson of history to heed, it's the future-oriented societies frequently overwhelm past-oriented ones. Okay, our present needs to be the point of origin and the past must be in the service of the present, not the other way around. Uncritical reverence for anything remote in time cannot be a panacea for our problems, folks. There lies the solution. Jai Hind.